There are places and then there are mysteries. Stories that refuse to fade. Places where whispers never truly die. Tonight, we journey into the shadows of 3 haunting tales. First, we begin with the story of a family who vanished from their home as if they were never there. The walls themselves seemed alive, carrying voices, whispers just out of reach, leaving nothing but the echo of their presence in the house they thought would shelter them forever. The whispering walls, the unsolved disappearance of the Carter family. Then we travel to the hills of Japan, where the Nakamura clan sought peace in a secluded home far from the noise of the world. But in those dark, quiet mountains, their new home carried its own hidden past, a history buried under years of silence. With each night, shadows grew deeper, calling to them. And one day, they were simply gone, the silent goodbye of the Nakamura clan. Finally, we end our journey in rural Mexico at Casa de Muertos, the House of the Dead. Here, a hollow wind fills the empty rooms, carrying the voices of all who came before. A place untouched, unwanted, where each family to cross its threshold disappears without a trace. The hollow wind whispers, but no one dares listen for too long. These are more than ghost stories. They are mysteries woven into the walls, the wind, the silence. Stories that demand to be told, and questions that may never have answers. Tonight, we bring them to life. If you're drawn to the shadows, to stories that haunt the mind and linger long after the last word, make sure you're with us for each tale. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so you won't miss a single moment. Because each story is just the beginning, and the darkness has so much more to reveal. Imagine moving into what seems like the perfect home on a quiet street. A charming old house filled with character and history, the kind that feels like it could hold generations of memories. You think you found your place in the world, a place where laughter should echo through the halls. But then, something shifts. It starts small, a faint rustling late at night, almost like whispers that carry from the walls, just out of earshot. You shrug it off, thinking it's just the house settling or the wind slipping through a crack. After all, old houses have their quirks, right? But what if those whispers weren't just the wind? What if you could swear you heard your name called out from the darkness, spoken in a voice that wasn't your own? You try to laugh it off, but then the footsteps start. Soft, like someone pacing the hallway in bare feet at night. You lie awake, holding your breath, straining to hear. But the moment you listen, it stops, leaving you wondering if it was ever real. Then your partner hears it too. You exchange uneasy glances, trying to keep things light, but you both know deep down, this isn't normal. What if those sounds weren't just echoes of an old building, but something else? We're going to explore the strange case of a family who heard voices in the walls and then vanished without a trace. This isn't an urban legend or an old wives' tale meant to scare kids from abandoned houses. This is a documented case, one that's baffled investigators, mystified neighbors, and left behind nothing but haunting questions. What was the source of those whispers? Where did the family go? And most importantly, why did no one hear from them ever again? The house sat on the edge of a quiet, sleepy town, framed by towering pines that swayed in the wind. It held a certain charm, a sense of history woven into its worn bricks and creaky floorboards. When the Carter family moved in, they were drawn to that history, to the way sunlight streamed through the antique glass windows, casting playful shadows on the floors. It was their dream home, until the whispers began. It started on a cold November night, the wind fierce, rattling the windows and seeping a chill through the walls. As the Carters settled in, they heard it for the first time, a faint murmur, like a distant conversation, muffled as if it were coming from deep within the house itself. They couldn't quite make out the words, but it was enough to pull them out of sleep, leaving them staring into the darkness, hearts pounding as they tried to make sense of what they had heard. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, maybe. The wind. They even joked about it the next morning over breakfast, calling it part of the house's charm. But as days passed, the whispers grew more insistent. Each night, the voices seemed closer, the words just out of reach, like someone trying to speak through a veil. Then came the footsteps. Late one night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., soft, deliberate footsteps echoed through the hallway, heavy enough to be human, slow, like someone taking careful, measured steps. Mr. Carter, flashlight in hand, crept down the stairs. But as he reached the bottom, the sound stopped, leaving the house in a silence so thick it felt suffocating. The next morning, they found scratches on the basement walls, small, claw-like marks etched into the old plaster, fresh, as if something had been trying to dig its way out. They called an exterminator, hoping for a simple answer. Rats, maybe, but the exterminator found nothing. No nests, no signs of pests, just those strange markings leading into the basement's darkness. Weeks passed, and the whispers turned darker. Sometimes they sounded like a child's voice, soft and pleading. Other times, a low murmur in a language they couldn't understand. They would wake to the sound of heavy breathing, as if someone were standing right beside their bed. The feeling of being watched became inescapable, creeping through the house each night. The Carters were like any other family. Parents in their late 30s, 2 kids in grade school, and a golden retriever who loved to chase squirrels in the backyard. They moved into the house on Maple Ridge Road in late October, charmed by its Victorian style and wraparound porch. They didn't know that beneath the house's quaint exterior was a history that no real estate listing could ever reveal. According to Locus, some claimed he fell from the roof. Others said he was found in the basement. No one knew for sure. Over the years, families moved in but left in a hurry, never to return. The Carters, of course, knew nothing of this, but that changed when the voices began. Mrs. Carter, a school teacher, tried to rationalize it as just old pipes. Her husband, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Late at night, he would press his ear to the walls, catching faint laughter, a child's laughter, echoing as if from a great distance. One night in the basement, they found a door hidden behind crates. It was small, locked with a rusted padlock. They pried it open, hoping to find storage. Instead, they found a tiny room, walls covered in strange symbols, and a moth-eaten mattress surrounded by melted candle stubs. Who had been living down there? Mr. Carter took photos with his phone, but the images were corrupted, as if something unseen had smeared the pictures. That night, the voices returned, clearer, whispering their names. Then the dog began to growl, a low, frightened sound that echoed through the house. Mr. Carter grabbed his flashlight and followed the dog to the basement. The door was ajar, though he'd locked it. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a shadow, just a shape darting behind a stack of boxes. Imagine hearing a child's voice calling out to you in the dead of night, only to find your kids sleeping soundly, tucked safely in bed. That was Mrs. Carter's life each night, sitting up with a flashlight, too afraid to close her eyes. What would you do? Would you leave, pack up, and never look back? Mrs. Carter heard laughter, clear and loud, coming from the vents above the fireplace. She ran to find her husband but found him downstairs staring at the basement door, hand on the knob as if he were drawn to it. Inside, they found the room changed. The symbols stretched across walls, almost pulsing in the dim light. And in the center was a dusty mirror. As he stepped closer, he saw movement in the reflection, just a shadow behind him. When he looked back at the mirror, he saw a word scratched into the glass. Listen. That night, they packed their belongings, determined to leave. But as they loaded the last box, their youngest asked, "Why is the man in the basement waving at us?" Mrs. Carter's hands shook as she turned to look, but the basement window was dark, reflecting only their car lights. The Carters never made it out of town. Their car was found parked neatly at the edge of the woods, engine running. Inside, the seats were empty, doors locked, and a single message written on the fogged windshield. "We hear you too." To this day, no one knows what happened to the Carters. The house stands empty, boarded up. Some say on quiet winter nights, you can still hear faint laughter echoing from within. Was it shared paranoia, a haunting, or something even stranger? Could the house have been a doorway to a world we don't understand? Or was it simply a place where tragedy found its way back? Let us know your theories in the comments below, because this next disappearance story happened in Asia, and you would be shaken to learn where the Nakamura family were later found. What happened to the Nakamura family in their final days remains a haunting mystery. Why did they choose such a remote, forgotten place? Did they know the history of that land, or the rumors of spirits bound to it? Were they drawn to it by choice or by fate? In this story, we'll piece together the strange clues, hear the chilling testimonies, and uncover the unsettling events that unfolded in Seishin no Keikai. Events that left an entire community forever changed. Hidden from view stands a house that's watched generations come and go, drawing them in and letting none of them stay. They call it Seishin no Keikai, the Spirit's Watch, a place where shadows stretch as if they have minds of their own, where the air is heavy, waiting. Locals say the land is old, ancient even, and that it remembers far more than we could imagine. From the outside, the house appears untouched by time, surrounded by cedar trees that stand tall, as if guarding it. The Nakamura family came here seeking a quiet life, far from the city. They believed this was a place to rebuild, where nature would welcome them. But it soon became clear that something else was waiting, something unseen but always present. Inside, the house held a stillness, almost too heavy to bear. Every step across the wooden floors echoed, each creak like a whisper from the past. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and traces of incense, as if previous residents had tried to ward off whatever lingered within. Yet despite the silence, there was a feeling of being watched, a constant awareness that something was there, just beyond reach, hidden in the shadows. For the Nakamuras, this house was meant to be their sanctuary, a retreat from the bustling city. Mr. Nakamura, a retired professor, longed for peace and reflection, while his wife Aiko dreamed of raising their children, Hana and Daichi, in nature's embrace. But the serenity they sought soon transformed into something else, an almost unnatural silence that hung over them. Late at night, Aiko would hear faint sounds from the attic, a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood, persistent and close. She lay awake, listening, hoping it was just branches scraping against the roof. But night after night, the sound grew louder, moving through the walls toward their rooms. One night, desperate to ease her growing fear, Aiko lit incense throughout the house, hoping to clear the air. As she watched the smoke trail upward, she thought she saw shapes forming, dark, fleeting figures that twisted and turned, watching her. She'd blink, and they'd vanish, but the feeling of something else there stayed long after the smoke disappeared. The villagers below had always been wary of Seishin no Keikai, and whenever a Nakamura family member came into town, locals would observe them in silence, exchanging anxious glances. Kinemura was steeped in tradition, its people bound by beliefs as old as the land itself. The villagers whispered that those who chose to live in Seishin no Keikai would encounter spirits, that the land held memories it could not forget or forgive. In the weeks that followed, strange offerings began appearing outside their door. Small stones stacked in spirals, sticks bound together with twine. The villagers dismissed them, but their fearful glances hinted at an unspoken warning. Each night, new sounds emerged, the soft murmur of voices, almost like a chant, that faded as quickly as it came. Whatever had left those tokens was watching, waiting. Aiko had started keeping a journal, recording the strange events, her entries growing more frantic each day. She wrote of nights when the entire family would wake at the same moment, feeling a presence just outside their doors, holding them in place, binding them to the house. They'd lie in bed, paralyzed, straining to hear the faintest sound, searching for answers in the silence. One winter night, a storm swept through the mountains, casting a thick, suffocating silence after it passed. As the family huddled together, the lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The children whispered of a pale, hollow face watching them from the window. When Aiko looked, there was nothing there, but the image lingered, burned into her mind. a reminder of the presence that held them. That night she heard it again, a low, mournful wail echoing through the house, filling it with an ancient sorrow. She clutched her ears trying to shut it out, but the sound seeped into her mind, conjuring images of rituals, faces twisted in grief. She wanted to scream, but her voice felt frozen. After that night, Aiko began to notice her family changing. Her husband, once vibrant, grew quiet and distant, his face hollow. The children too seemed different. They would stare off into space, entranced by something only they could see, something that whispered to them alone. Desperate for answers, Aiko turned to the villagers, hoping to learn about the house's past. But they would only avert their eyes, offering polite smiles and ending the conversation quickly. An elderly woman finally took pity on her, pulling her aside to whisper, "This land, it belonged to them, the ones who never left. They say if you listen closely, you can still hear them calling. It's best not to listen." Then she hurried away, leaving Aiko with more questions than answers. Back at the house, objects began to move. Small, unexplainable shifts. The teapot, once set firmly on the table, would be found on the windowsill. Family photos hung neatly on the walls would tilt, sometimes even facing backward. And then there were the handprints, small, childlike marks smeared on windows and mirrors, as if someone had pressed their palms against the glass, looking in from the other side. Aiko's husband spent hours alone in the attic, sitting by a small shrine they'd found. She would find him there, muttering softly, his eyes fixed on an old statue of a fox, a known trickster in Japanese folklore. She'd called to him, but he wouldn't respond, his gaze locked, as though entranced by something she couldn't see. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the walls, the family gathered at the dinner table. It was too quiet, as if the house itself were listening. Suddenly, the children looked up, eyes wide, and whispered, "He's here." The words sent a chill down Aiko's spine, and she turned, expecting to see something, anything, but there was only the echo of their voices. To this day, the Nakamura family's fate remains one of Kinemura's most haunting mysteries. An entire family vanished without a trace, leaving only strange symbols, chilling wails, and an empty house holding its secrets close. The villagers still speak of Seishin no Keikai, their voices low, as though mentioning it too often might awaken something dark. What do you think? Could it have been something bound to the mountain? Or was it the house itself, holding on to those who dared to stay? Or could it be that the family, drawn in by isolation and silence, were simply lost in something we'll never understand? If you're drawn to stories like these, don't forget to subscribe. We'll share these mysteries every day, each one stranger, each one darker, because you would wonder why a house in Mexico is called the House of the Dead in this next story. As the sun sets below the hills, the landscape is painted in golden light, casting long shadows across the valley. Yet as night falls, something shifts. The quiet of the valley fades, replaced by an eerie, howling wind that sweeps down the slopes, through the fields, and up against the walls of Casa de Muertos with unnatural force. They say if you stand close enough, you can hear faint noises from inside, soft murmurs, the groaning creak of old wood, even laughter. But the laughter that lingers here isn't joyful. It's empty, mocking, hanging in the air long after it fades. The first family who dared call Casa de Muertos home was the Ramirez family, a small family of 5 who came seeking simplicity, hoping to raise their children away from the chaos of city life. The locals were glad to see life return to the old house and welcomed them with open arms. But the welcome didn't last long. Strange rumors soon began to circulate. Neighbors claimed to hear wails that drifted through the valley on cold nights, while others swore they saw shadows moving through the windows even after the lights had gone out. The villagers shook their heads, muttering that Casa de Muertos had always been cursed, that it was built on land stained by ancient rites, and that those who entered were bound to become part of its haunted presence. At first, the Ramirezes shrugged off the stories, but as the months passed, something shifted in them too. Neighbors noticed they rarely came to town. When they did, their faces were drawn, their eyes distant, as though haunted by things they couldn't explain. The children who once played joyfully in the fields stopped venturing outside, staying close to the house, watching from behind the windows. And at night, locals saw their small faces peering through the glass, staring blankly at the valley below, as though they were waiting for something unseen. Inside the house, the air grew colder, and a faint smell of damp earth and decay settled into every corner, as though something was slowly rotting beneath the floorboards. The rooms, which were filled with sunlight during the day, turned hollow and dark at night, shadows stretching across the walls, reaching from every corner, crawling up the walls like thick, creeping vines. The Ramirezes tried to hold on to a sense of normalcy, lighting candles, praying before each meal, whispering reassurances to one another. But the candles flickered and died quickly, casting fleeting shadows across the walls. And every time they tried to settle, the wind would rise again, louder, carrying with it what sounded like broken whispers, a language they couldn't understand, words just out of reach, and they'll pray the morning comes quicker. One stormy night, the villagers heard the sound of laughter again, high, shrill, piercing through the thunder. But this time, it was followed by a scream that rose and fell with the wind, stretching across the valley. By morning, the storm had passed, but the house stood silent. The Ramirezes had vanished, leaving behind only the walls that held the echoes of their final days. Worried and afraid, the villagers went to investigate, only to find the house empty. The table was set, plates left as though abandoned in the middle of a meal. There was no sign of a struggle, no clue as to where the family had gone. Only an eerie, oppressive silence lingered in the air, pressing down on those who dared step inside. On the kitchen counter sat a line of small dolls made from twine, each with a face painted in soot, each staring unblinking toward the door as if waiting for someone. After that, Casa de Muertos was abandoned. No one dared go near it, and with time, the villagers stopped speaking of it altogether. The stories faded into whispered tales, stories told only by firelight. Yet the house remained silent, empty, waiting as if holding on to each memory within its walls. Years passed, and the legend of Casa de Muertos continued to grow, spreading far beyond the valley. For some, the house was a mere tale of folklore, an abandoned property filled with ghost stories, nothing more. But for others, the allure was too great. They saw Casa de Muertos as an opportunity, a place to make their mark, or to find something truly extraordinary. In the early 2000s, a wealthy city couple heard of the house and decided to make it their own. They had grand plans, renovations, new fixtures, everything to transform the old structure into a modern retreat. When they arrived, the locals watched warily, knowing that each family who had come to Casa de Muertos had vanished, but the couple dismissed the warnings. They smiled politely, waving off the villagers' stories as superstitions meant to scare outsiders. They were Americans. At first, everything was peaceful. The couple worked tirelessly, clearing out old furniture, removing layers of dust, painting the walls anew. For a brief moment, the house seemed almost alive again. But as the renovations continued, strange things began to happen. Workers claimed to hear footsteps in empty rooms. Tools disappeared, only to be found in odd places: the attic, the basement, even outside, as if someone had moved them. One day, a worker stumbled upon a hidden room in the attic. It was small and dark, barely large enough for one person. Inside, he found strange objects: small bones wrapped in red cloth, clay figurines painted in red and black, candles burned down to stubs. The worker held one of the figurines, and a cold breeze swept through the room, sending a chill down his spine. He claimed to hear faint whispers echoing from the walls, words he couldn't understand, telling him to leave. Shaken, he dropped the figurine and left, never returning to the house again. Despite these unsettling events, the couple pushed on, determined to finish their project. But as the renovations neared completion, the woman began noticing strange occurrences. The sound of children laughing in the hallways, though no one was there. The faint smell of incense drifting through rooms late at night, and at times the sound of drums, almost like a distant ritual, coming from somewhere within the house. Then one evening, she found a straw doll under the staircase. Its eyes were small beads, its mouth a wide, stitched grin that seemed to mock her. She tried to dismiss it as a relic of the past, but every time she returned, the doll had moved, turned slightly, its bead eyes fixed on her, as if watching her every step. By then, the couple's peaceful retreat had transformed into a place of dread. Each night, the wind howled through the house, carrying voices that rose and fell with each gust, as though someone were calling out from the walls. One night, the husband woke to find the bedroom filled with a thick, cold fog. His wife stood by the window, staring blankly into the darkness, her face expressionless, her body frozen. By morning, they had packed and left Casa de Muertos without a word to anyone, abandoning everything they'd worked for. The villagers knew the signs the curse of Casa de Muertos had claimed yet another family. To this day, Casa de Muertos stands silent and empty, its walls holding on to the echoes of those who disappeared within. Locals avoid it, passing by only with a shiver, while children dare only to whisper its name. What could have caused these disappearances? Was it truly a curse, a haunting bound to the land itself? Or was it something older, something darker, rooted in rituals from the past? Some questions are best left unanswered, but Casa de Muertos waits, as though it knows one day someone will return, hoping to unlock its secrets. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if these tales draw you in, if you seek the shadows that dwell beyond the light, don't forget to subscribe. Each day I uncover another mystery that stretches beyond the grave, another story that may make you wonder what truly lies hidden in the darkness. Until then, stay curious and beware of the places where the hollow wind blows.